All right, what's going on? Bro History here, Danny and Henry. Danny is back to help us out with a particular topic. I hope you guys all had a chance to listen to my interview with Scott Horton that was released yesterday. We are recording right now pretty much directly after that interview. It's Monday evening. This episode is set to be released on Wednesday as sort of a follow-up to that interview. And Danny and I will be discussing a pretty specific topic because we feel like there's a very big gap of knowledge in most people's perspective. We're talking about the differences between nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. Right, Danny?
That's right.
And the reason why we're doing that is because for two reasons. One reason is because there's just a general lack of knowledge of it. People get really scared whenever they hear the word nuclear because nuclear weapons have been used to destroy entire cities. The other reason is because nuclear could be used. The word nuclear itself is used as a way to scare people into having to bomb other countries. So we want to just go through the facts, fictions, myths about nuclear energy, make it very clear. So when you're debating your friends or when you're talking to your friends about things like the Iran deal or North Korea or whatever country that has either nuclear weapons programs or civilian nuclear energy programs, we want you to be armed with some good knowledge. And I just want to give a quick warning or disclaimer. Danny and I, neither of us are scientists. Frequent listeners are probably very aware of that. Frequent listeners are very aware that we do not have scientific backgrounds, but we know the basics to give you kind of a rudimentary understanding of the difference of these two programs. So I guess I'll kick it off directly to you. So Jeffrey Epstein.
I don't think that there's a science to explain what's going on there, and I haven't done enough research anyway. So next topic.
next topic, Jeffrey Epstein. But it's such a weird story, and it's disgusting. First of all, but
absolutely,
my immediate thought is just I haven't seen really that much coverage of Jeffrey Epstein. I'm pretty ignorant of exactly what the entire story is. The headline is horrendously disgusting, but I just really, really want to see Alex Jones' take on this.
Oh man,
that's really that's really what I want to see. Like I want to see like really kind of theatrical commentators like go on this story because I know it will be hilarious and it's like a lot of confirmation bias, or I don't want to say confirmation bias, but it confirms a lot of the things that they say about like billionaire pedophiles and stuff like that. Yeah. So that would be entertaining. We're not going to comment on that. Off topic. All right. What is nuclear energy, Danny?
Well, that's a very, very big question. I'll premise it by saying that for those folks who are frequent listeners and listen to our Saudi Arabia nuclear deal, we're going to be covering a lot of basics that we already talked about then. It's important, and I think we're going to shed some light on some interesting new points that we didn't already cover in that. So just heads up, we're going to be talking about some basics that you might already have heard. But for you new listeners or those folks who haven't listened to the Saudi one, here's a basic breakdown of what is nuclear energy. So in a nutshell, the bro history version, nuclear energy is derived by specific compounds, specific elements. Uranium and plutonium might come to mind when you think about nuclear. These are two elements on the periodic table of elements that are basically unstable. What happens is that, stuff flies off of them. It creates a lot of energy just naturally occurring through radiation. We harness that radiation, that energy, to heat up some water. And then that water, steam, that heated water turns into steam, which turns some turbines and creates electricity. So there's not, from a basic premise, a whole lot different from nuclear energy and steam energy. They're essentially the same thing because they operate in that same fashion, at least the nuclear reactors that are very popular across the different countries that use them currently. There are some alternatives that we'll talk about a little later in the show, but the basic premise is we've got some nuclear material, right? Uranium or plutonium. It decays. We harness that energy. and then that heats up some water, turns a turbine, creates some energy, right? It's like the 2.0 version of the, coal-fired steam engine.
So yeah, it's like a very advanced version of the steam engine. That's a great comparison to have like a visual model in your head. It's just an
Right.
advanced version of the steam engine. I mean, just an advanced version of the steam engine doesn't do it justice, but essentially that's kind of what it is, right?
That's basically how it's operating. Now, currently, 31 countries operate nuclear power plants, and they're mostly in Europe, North America, East Asia, and South Asia. I'm not going to go through the list of all 31 of them, but the top five, I'm sure you probably can guess them off the top of your head without even thinking about it. It's the United States, that's us, France, China, China, Russia, and then South Korea, so the Korean Republic there. So those are the major players. They generate energy in the terawatt hours. So that's huge. That is energy, for millions and millions and millions of people, probably billions if you add them all up. But as far as the share of like energy production, nuclear is pretty low. I'm reading different estimates, so maybe don't quote this when you talk about nuclear energy with your friends, but it's anywhere between 5 and 6% of total energy production globally. Nevertheless, though, terawatt hours are huge, and it means a whole lot of fucking energy gets created through nuclear power. Obviously, the big players in energy creation game are going to be your oil, your coal, your natural gas, and other basically carbon-based fuel sources, stuff that we dig out of the ground that was like dead plants and dinosaurs and shit, and then we burn it, and then that's what turns into energy. That's the lion's share of energy consumption. But, as you pointed out, Henry, there's a lot of folks that are, very concerned about the environment, rightfully so. And we're talking a lot about shifting away from, carbon-based or fossil fuels and moving to something a little bit more sustainable, a little cleaner. There is, of course, wind and solar and other renewables. I think it's important to note that nuclear energy is not a renewable energy source, in that there's a finite amount of, say, nuclear elements that we can use in reactors. However, it is a sustainable energy source in that the sources of this are abundant and it's incredibly efficient, well more efficient than a lot of the other renewables. But it comes with its downplays too. And there's a lot of things that you need to consider when thinking about like what should our alternative energy, where should it come from if we're not going to be using fossil fuels?
So here's a question. So we're big proponents. The way I look at nuclear energy is so this is probably not the right way to think of it in a political sense at all, but my mind jumps into this anyway. And that's maybe that's just my ignorance, but I always feel that, first of all, nuclear energy, it works. Can you confirm that it produces power? It produces
Absolutely.
it absolutely
very
works.
reliably.
It's
yes.
a proven source of energy.
Yep.
And I always kind of saw nuclear energy as a political meeting ground between the people who do not want to go off fossil fuels and the people who are, the environmentalist, the political environmentalists who want us to get off fossil fuels. So I always thought that nuclear energy has always been the correct meeting ground for that. One side says, okay, we'll start getting off fossil fuels. Why don't we transfer the nuclear energy over the years? But then it seems like that's not a very popular source of energy because just the word itself is just very scary for many people.
Sure.
So I don't think is it because, do you think the reason why nuclear is stigmatized, and there's various reasons, weapons, we'll get into that next, but do you think it's more so just because they're scared of the risk of meltdowns like what
Yeah.
we just saw in the movie Chernobyl, which is an excellent film that really kind of, I think it's probably one of the best historical shows
Yeah.
that's come out in a really long time as far as capturing. I mean, what do I know? Accuracy, but it sure as hell entertained me, and I felt like I learned a lot about I felt that I learned a lot on that
For
show,
sure.
which is a good accomplishment.
Yeah.
Especially it picked up the slack from that lousy Game of Thrones season 8, right?
For sure. Yeah, it was a good rebound.
McQueen, McQueen,
I don't want it.
I don't want it. I don't want it. It picked up the diaper that they put on Jon Snow after effectively building him for 6 seasons into a badass character, into a little bitch who fucking, guess who uncharacteristically killed his lover slash family member. But I digress.
Hey, spoiler alert for those who haven't caught up yet.
If you haven't watched that, if you're a Game of Thrones person and you haven't watched the last episode of Game of Thrones, or if you haven't, it hasn't been spoiled for you already, then what the fuck? Like, come on.
Under a rock. Yeah. Okay. So, what was the original question? Oh yeah. So what do you think is the reason why it's so stigmatized? So, I pointed out that there are definitely some risks that are involved, some things that we have to think about when considering nuclear power as like an alternative, to pick up the slack for those giant, fossil fuel production of energy. And I think it boils down to about 2 or 3 really big concerns. So the first one that we're just going to lightly touch on, because we're going to talk more about it later, would be obviously the weapons thing, right? You say nuclear, people think nuclear bombs. There's similar processes, definitely similar, fuel sources. So yeah, there's that for sure. We'll talk more about that later. Then there's also, the kind of the death, right? Like how much death does it cause? And, with a show like Chernobyl, or, if you're just watching the news in the early 2010s, it's, Fukushima Daiichi, they had a pretty big earthquake with a following tsunami in Japan, and that caused some pretty bad stuff to happen in Fukushima, to the point where like people don't live there anymore because it's irradiated to the point where you can't. And that's a concern. So like people die when shit goes wrong. Meltdowns are a thing. I want to make some arguments for how we can prevent those a little later in the show, but that's definitely something to think about. So I think those are like the 2 main ones. There might be a third in there as well, and that third one would be like the waste, like how do we store it? Is that safe? And that kind of ties into like the safety and the death issues as well. And if you want to tie in the polluting ability of nuclear fuel here, but I think maybe we should start with just that big one, the deaths, because everyone's afraid of dying, if they live near a, nuclear reactor, that it's going to melt down and that they're going to die. Well, statistically speaking, nuclear actually is on the very bottom for deaths per capita for energy production. So basically what that means is, of all of the different energy sources that we use, nuclear kills the fewest people over time by a lot. So looking at the world average, the biggest killer would be coal electricity, and that kills about 60 people per unit of energy created. And let me get this correct. Actually, that is 60% of all of the deaths related to energy. So the lion's share is going to coal. You can think of a couple of ways that happens, right? So a few ways is like I'm in a mine and I'm digging up some coal, and then that shit collapses on me and I die. Or I'm in a mine and I've been doing it for years and I breathe in a bunch of, dust from the things and I get the black lung and I die. Or just other ways, right? So we burn coal and we put all that carbon into the air, and that, people breathe that air, and people die because they get like lung cancer and shit from it. Or, probably more broadly speaking, you can make the argument that coal releases a bunch of, carbons into the atmosphere, which produces runaway climate change, which causes megastorms like, giant hurricanes and shit. And people die from those hurricanes, right? So you can loosely attribute those deaths there as well. But coal, by and large, the biggest killer. And I think part of what we need to think about there is the reason why it is a big killer is not only just because it does kill people for practical reasons, but also because we just use a lot of it, right? Coal is still very, very widely available. It's easy to find. It's easy to dig up. Once you've dug it up, you don't have to do anything to it. You just stick it in a furnace and burn it, So it's a viable solution, especially for an economically viable solution, I should say, especially for up and coming countries like China and India and different places like that. Up next on that list would be oil at 36%, natural gas at 4%. So, if we're looking at these carbon-based energy sources and you wanted to pick one of them that's like the safest in terms of how many people it kills, probably natural gas is your way to go. Petroleum industries probably could give me a pat on the back for shouting out natural gas there. But generally speaking, it's still killing a lot more people than some of our other forms of energy. I'm not really going to talk about like biofuel and peat because the numbers are a little weird on that, and I didn't get some straight answers, but it's expected around to be similar to natural gas in that respect. But our other big ones are renewable energy sources. So solar kills 0.44% of people when we're looking at the total of deaths related to energy production. So I found that one pretty funny. It's like, how does solar kill people? But believe it or not, the way that it's killing people is because of the installation on roofs, right? So like, people go up to the roof to install a solar panel and slip off the thing and die. Or alternatively, it's not secured properly and it falls on someone and then they die, which I thought was actually pretty funny, of all the ways to die.
Hey, mom, look, I'm installing a solar panel. Oh, I'm dead.
Exactly. But that's
I'm dead.
It's a little weird because it's only solar energy accounts for only 0.2% of the world's energy production. So I wonder, how that would pan out. Like when we start ramping up solar, like will a lot more people just start dying because like solar panels are falling off roofs and killing people? It's possible. Obviously, an easy way to fix that would be don't put them on roofs, or put them on roofs in such a way that doesn't kill people. I think there's plenty of places to go there, and plenty of updates that you can do to prevent more deaths if we upscale solar, not unlike coal or burning fossil fuels in general, which is going to create carbons regardless of how you do it, which will kill people regardless of how you do it. Now there's ways to mitigate some of those issues and reduce the amount of carbons, but generally speaking, we're burning so damn much of it that even if we half the amount of dangerousness to it, it's going to still kill more people than all of the other energy sources combined. Wind is 0.15%, and that's only 1.6% of the world energy, which is more than solar there. I don't know how people are dying from wind. I'd like to believe that they get like sliced up by the blades. I think that would be pretty cool.
Yeah, Mortal Kombat fatalities.
Exactly.
Mortal Kombat fatalities. Up, down, B. It knocks you off the stage and you fall into a wind turbine.
Exactly. That's how they die.
That's how they die.
Combat. And then hydroelectric, it's only 0.1%, so a tenth of a percent, and it's 2.2% of world energy. This is probably the biggest of the renewable energy sources in terms of production. Don't know how the hydro ones kill you either. Maybe people drown. I don't know. Maybe
it's probably people drown. That's my first assumption, that
dams break and then it like just floods a whole city and then all those people die, but that happens maybe once every 100 years or something like that. I don't know.
That recently happened in, I believe, was it Laos that happened?
Maybe. Sure.
There was a dam that broke. It was I think it was Laos, but it happened. Like, man, I really want to bring up, I wish I had this article up.
I think the point is that it does happen, but we're talking about 0.1% of all energy related deaths in the world, right? So it's so small, and it's producing 2.2% of our energy that we, I mean, you can die fucking walking down the street, you know, like, does that prevent you from walking down the street? No. Right. I'm actually fairly certain that you're much, much more likely to die in a, you know, in an automobile related accident than you are from a hydroelectric dam. So, you know,
And just to confirm, yeah, it's 2018. It happened in Laos.
Laos.
40 people died and 98 to 1,000 people are missing. So,
Oh,
I mean,
okay. That's a
it's,
lot of people.
I mean, I'm sure Laos doesn't, where it flooded. I remember reading this. The Times was covering this about, this happened like a year ago. The Times was covering this, and I can recall from those articles that they couldn't even figure out the death toll, because in Laos, where the dam broke, it was like a lot of villages and stuff, like very small villages. So you just wouldn't be able to get an accurate head count of the people who died there. But yeah, I mean, that does happen. But the thing about hydro energy is that hydro, you can't use that. Every country doesn't have the luxury
Nope.
of using hydro. Like,
Right. You need like a roaring river or like something like that in order for you to really.
Iceland has a really good system.
Mm-hmm.
I believe they do. I think it's Iceland, and there's a couple of Central American countries that have strong hydroelectricity.
It's
systems in place.
geo-locked, which means that, you know,
Exactly.
you have to be in the right place in the world in order to be able to capitalize on this. That's why we can't really upscale hydro, really. You know, there's only but so many rivers that we can use this with, so many rivers that we can dam. Also, you know, there's environmental impacts on damming rivers, right? So, you know, there's that as well. But I won't get too liberal on that. So that leads us to our last and final and arguably safest in terms of death rate energy source, and that's the topic of the show, and that's nuclear, right? That's 0.04% of all of the energy-related deaths per capita, and it produces almost 6% of the world's energy. So, you know, we're talking about higher output than solar, wind, hydro, and other renewables combined, right? And a fraction of any one of those, period, right? So where is that 0.04 of, you know, percent of deaths come from? It's literally from, you know, those ridiculous disasters that happen, you know, every 30 years, and actually one seems to happen about every 30 years, right? So there was the first one, I'm try and remember this one, I think was in the 50s, and then another one that was Chernobyl. So the first one was in Russia. I forget the exact location, but that was in the 50s. The second one was in Ukraine, and that one's Chernobyl, and that was in the 80s. And then the Fukushima disaster in Japan. So that was the early 2010s. So we're due for another one, 2040. So keep your eyes out for that one. But, you know, so when we're wrapping up this question, the question is like, is this a safe thing? You know, statistically speaking, yes, it is very safe. It doesn't kill nearly as many people by a lot than many of the other energy sources. So, you know, when you're thinking about, is nuclear safe? If we're specifically talking about deaths per capita, yes, I think we can firmly say it's pretty safe. Now, go ahead. I think you're.
Oh, no, go. You were probably going to go.
Yeah, I just wanted to wrap that up with a conclusion. It's like, the point is that nothing is perfectly safe. Like, there is no such energy source that's not going to kill anyone ever, right? It's going to happen, right? People die. It's a thing, right? We can do things to avoid it, right? But I think just like us ignoring an energy source, you know, because of, you know, misconceptions about its safety, you know, is a little weird. And you know, there are things that we can definitely do with other energy sources to make them better. Like we were talking about solar panels, maybe don't put them on the roofs, or maybe do things to make them safer when we do put them on the roofs. You know, maybe making, there's arguments to make natural gas and coal less dangerous, right? And that's maybe something that we can do in the interim. But I think the general argument is like, okay, we really need to get off of this for environmental reasons, for, you know, economic reasons, for geopolitical reasons. So, you know, putting that off the table, there's definitely the focus needs to be on, you know, finding the right balance of energy sources, and I think nuclear should be a part of that conclusion. And we shouldn't just write it off because it's unsafe. And the biggest point that I want to make on the safety of it is, a nice country like France, for example, right? So France, fairly big.
Don't call them nice.
They're very nice. So they're actually producing something like 75% of all of their energy with nuclear. Now, they're going to ramp that down by quite a bit, but so by 2035, the government's planning on bringing that down to 50%. But we're still talking about 50% of the energy of this entire modernized nation, and they are very energy hungry, just like we are. That's a lot, right? And of that, they're pretty efficient at using it because they invest heavily in their nuclear technologies. So I think 17% of France's electricity comes from recycled nuclear fuel, which we'll talk about the waste component in a moment for some of like the drawbacks. So that's 17% of France's energy is coming just from recycling old nuclear fuel, which is pretty awesome. And their production is enormous. I think the counter argument is like, oh, it's France. How much energy could they possibly produce? Well, it's a lot. It's so much that they're actually the biggest exporter of energy in Europe, and they're making $3 billion a year exporting energy, largely created from nuclear energy. So it's making them money. They don't seem to be very scared about it. When was the last time you heard about any problems there with nuclear stuff? And because they're investing so much money into it, they're doing things in France to make their nuclear energy safer, cleaner, and by that 17% stat, less harmful to the environment because of waste. I think they can do better. I think we can all do better. But here's that stat that I was looking for earlier: 556 terawatts of energy. That's an insane amount of terawatt hours, I should say. That's an insane amount. Like it's a lot. I don't even know how to make comparisons here. Just trust me on this one. It's a lot of fucking energy. Like a lot.
So, all right, two questions. One question is podcast related. My audio that you're delivering is coming through Zoom, not the cast, right?
Yes.
Okay. Just because the volume's going up and down on my end, but it doesn't matter because you're recording on cast. Second, so the big question is, all right, here's my take on it. So I think that countries should be able to use the best source of energy that they have available for them. So in the case of a country like Iceland, or a country that that's blessed with rivers and the ability to use hydroelectricity, they should really, that's what they should really use.
Yeah.
In the case of nuclear energy, I just don't, when it's done right, it seems like a much better, safer option than all the other renewable energy sources.
For sure.
I really wish that there wasn't this stigma surrounding nuclear energy, because, there's a couple of things that I think in the future, it will create energy independence from things like fossil fuels that are used as geopolitical leverage for various things. But now you're finding different ways to make sure that people don't have the ability, or countries don't have the ability, to create nuclear energy, like what U.S. foreign policy has been doing or been trying to do with Iran and all and that. But I don't want to get too much to Iran because we covered that topic in our last episode to death. The big question is, and what people are wondering, is what is the difference between a nuclear civilian program, or a civilian nuclear program rather, and a nuclear bomb? Like, what is the science behind it? What, they're not the same. You take over. You'll be a lot more articulate.
For sure. And before we talk about that weapons part, there's that one extra safety thing that I want to talk about just very quickly, and that's how we store the waste of nuclear energy. Because if I don't talk about this, then we're going to get a bunch of anti-nuclear folks like ratting on us for not bringing up like the elephant in the room. And it is a big fucking elephant, and that's that nuclear energy as it stands right now, the way that we use it in our reactors, it's very inefficient in the sense that we use about 2 to 3% of it, and then we just take the rest of it and we put it in a vat, and we just keep it there. We do nothing about it, and that's super, super dangerous and very, very bad for the environment. And if we ramp up our nuclear energy without figuring out what to do with all that spent fuel, what's going to happen is that we're just going to have tons and tons and tons of like very dangerous radioactive material that, by the way, uranium will decay. It has a half-life, or that means it will be radioactive for like something like 10,000 years. Right? We're talking about way, 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 way longer than any of us will be alive. And there's no good like thing to do with it. You know, people have explored that you can't shoot it out into space, like shoot it into the into the sun or something crazy, because now we're talking about if rockets explode sometimes. I mean, Apollo 11, even some of the SpaceX rockets exploded, when they're sending them up. So if one of those rockets, just one of those rockets carrying not a whole lot of nuclear waste, exploded on the way out in space, well, now we're all fucked, because we're putting a bunch of like nuclear radiation into the atmosphere. It's going to go around the Earth, and yeah, we're all fucked. So you can't really do very much with it. Like our current plans are to either keep it in a barrel, and the barrel might be rated for like 100 years maybe, but then we have to figure out what to do with it in 100 years. It's like kicking the proverbial can down the road. That's super, super bad. More reasonable things would be to bury it underground, but the problem is that we have to locate sites that are like geologically stable, meaning there won't be an earthquake there, which could potentially expose the radioactive materials. And also it has to be isolated enough where we can keep it away from people in case something happens, and that we can keep it secure in case, I don't know, some crazies decide they want to try and loot nuclear fuel reserves to try and somehow make bombs out of it, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about later when we talk about the weaponization of nuclear power. And we certainly can't dump it in the water. That's absolutely terrible. It's an absolute no-no, because it would kill everything in the ocean, and I don't think we need to go into why that's a bad thing. But so the waste is a really big problem.
It's because it will kill mermaids, and we don't want that.
Exactly. Right. All the Atlanteans would go to war with us if we started doing that again. So
you think Iran's a threat? Wait till you see Aquaman.
Seriously, he'll fuck you up.
Aquaman's a Muslim, so scare you even more. All right, I digress.
So yeah, I just wanted to make that point because it's super important. That's another part of the consideration when thinking about ramping up nuclear energy, because with the ramping up of nuclear energy, we're also going to be ramping up the waste product of the nuclear energy itself. And I think that's super, super important to talk about. Okay. That placated all the folks that are going to yell at me for not talking about it. So you asked.
They'll yell at you anyway.
Yeah, I know. No matter what we do.
I got yelled at by an Iranian dude for defending Iran the other day. So,
oh, interesting.
Yeah. But go on.
You talked about what's the difference between nuclear energy for civilian energy production and nuclear weapons. Like, what's the science behind it? So, it's funny, and this is where we get into tricky territory. U.S. foreign policy currently, and honestly, like world foreign policy tends to be, don't give anyone the ability to create nuclear energy without extremely vetting them and placing a lot of like asterisks behind it, because of this one very true and very unfortunate fact. The way that we create the way that we enrich uranium to make nuclear power is pretty much exactly the same as the process for making bombs. The only difference there is that you just leave it cooking in the oven for a little longer. That's about it. So back to like how this stuff works. So we would dig up some uranium. I'm not going to go through each of the isotopes, by the way, because I think it's boring and I'm probably going to fuck it up and someone's going to yell at me for doing that. All you need to know is that uranium comes in a couple of different flavors, right? Some of the flavors are very, let's say potent, and some of the flavors aren't, right? So the types of flavors of uranium and plutonium that we dig out of the ground.
Is Nutella a flavor?
Yes, the Nutella flavored plutonium, or Plutella. That stuff isn't good enough just to stick. We can't just stick that in a reactor and say, hey, go, you can actually take uranium and literally set it on fire. All that's going to happen is it's going to burn. It's not going to cause a bomb. It's not going to explode or anything crazy like that. Like, you need to You need to synthesize it. You need to enrich it. A good way to think about it is if you're a drinker and you know how, say, in distilling liquors or spirits work, they basically distill it over and over and over again to make it more potent, right? To make it stronger, to increase the proof. Think of it that way, right? So you get some raw, material, some raw radioactive material out of the ground. We put it in an oven and we let it sit there until it's, like 2 to 3%, potent, right? And that's good enough to make nuclear energy with, right? That's about the sweet spot, what we want, 2 to 3%. Jumping back to the Iran thing, Iran saying that they're going to go above 3.6% or whatever, that's, scary in a certain respect, but at the same time, like nuclear weapons grade stuff is like in like the 90 percentile range. It's got to be like extremely potent stuff in order for you to make bombs with it. Nevertheless, though, the same technology that we use to bake the bread in the oven, so to speak, is the same exact technology that we would use to make the bomb stuff. Only difference, again, is we leave it in the oven for longer. And this is where we hit a bit of an impasse, right? On the one hand, as we discussed in great detail, nuclear doesn't kill as many people. It's super efficient. It can generate lots and lots of power relatively cheaply. But on the other hand, if you were a nefarious actor, you could just use the same exact technology to make bombs. And many, many countries have done so already. As a matter of fact, let me pull up my little list here. There are currently 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7, maybe 8, because there's some undeclared nuclear power singular, that have the bomb, right? So obviously Russia, the United States and Russia, we top out the top list. I think it goes back and forth on who has more, but let's just put it this way. Either of us can destroy the planet like 100 times over with our arsenals. So, moot point on figuring out who has more. And then the United Kingdom has them. France has them. I guess that makes sense because they're also producing a whole lot of nuclear energy. China has nuclear weapons. And then since then, a bunch of countries who we exported the technology to create nuclear energy just up and made bombs with it. So biggest actors there are India, Pakistan. We didn't give North Korea that technology, but they figured it out on their own somehow. They probably exported it from, other countries, kind of like on the down low. And then the last person on the list, the last country or state on the list that probably has the bomb, most definitely has the bomb, but isn't on paper as having the bomb, is Israel.
That stole the technology from the U.S. to get the bomb is Israel.
Right.
Sorry, I had to add that explanation because if we don't, then we'll get shitted on for being
right.
But yeah, Benjamin Netanyahu himself was involved in that.
Right.
But we can. That's another. We actually did a podcast on that. Scott Horton and I talked about that yesterday. So check out that show about this earlier today in the last podcast. And we did one with Ted Snyder, who wrote a piece on it about a couple months ago. If you want to learn more, but that is completely irrelevant to what we're talking about right now. All right. Continue.
Kind of the point, though, here is that we have a reasonable, fear. And that reasonable fear is if we give technology, and by we, I mean nuclear-capable countries, provide the same technology to create peaceful energy production to up-and-coming countries, it is very easy from a technology perspective to use that technology to make bombs. Now, I guess, thankfully, we have, government and world organizations in place which regulate and heavily monitor, all of the nuclear nations, most, I should say, for, how they're using the technology to produce their own energy. And, they are very careful at, paying attention to how much do we enrich that nuclear fuel, right? If we get beyond a certain level, then we're like, hey, what are you doing with that? You're well beyond that 3% there, maybe they might wag their finger at you or send you a letter or some shit. I'm not entirely sure how they enforce it. But the point, though, is that like clearly
By
they're
killing you.
well, these world organizations don't have military forces. They have to be backed up by
The United States.
exactly, right? Or NATO, generally speaking.
The United States, you mean?
Yeah, the United States. Okay, I concede. Right, and that's where we get like a lot of these like geopolitical like issues, right? So Iran right now, enriching their uranium, they say it's for like peaceful stuff, and we use it as propaganda to say like, hey, they got the bomb, right? We did it in Iraq, saying they had the bomb, they didn't. But I think it's a totally reasonable thing to be kind of afraid of, because obviously we've leveled 2 full cities in Japan, during World War II with the technology. And, don't want to get all high and mighty and say that, the United States is the only folks that has the ability to restrain themselves when talking about nuclear weapons, but like, don't really trust everyone, don't really trust a whole lot. I mean,
well, the U.S. is the only country that has used nuclear weapons.
Exactly. So I don't fully trust us either.
So it's like, all right, so you're in a room full of killers,
Right.
or presumed killers, rather.
Right.
And you're like, who's most likely to kill somebody? I don't know, maybe the person who killed someone before, but
right. Maybe
off the point. But yeah.
So that's a tough one. It's very tough, because it sucks that people suck. Let's just put it that way. It sucks that countries suck, and they would rather use this technology, which could be very liberating and very positive for, all people in terms of energy creation and liberation, that they would use it for nefarious purposes. And even if they never intend on using the nuclear weapon, or never, just want to get it so that they can secure a seat at the table, so to speak, or to use as a deterrence against other countries because they also want to join in on the MAD game. So mutually assured destruction, MAD. Even if that was their like MO, it still kind of sucks, because it's like, oh, you guys got guns, I want a gun, I'm going to point the gun right at you, and then, we'll get along that way.
Most countries don't want nuclear weapons, though.
Yeah.
Most countries don't want them.
Yeah, most of them don't, but it's like, technologically speaking, it's regardless of if you want it or not, once we give you the keys, you can open up Pandora's box whenever you want.
But in the case, all right, so the big topics is the nuclear conversation comes up when you're talking about either one of 2 countries. That's North Korea, which has nuclear warheads, that actually does have nuclear weapons.
The shitty ones, but they have them nonetheless.
They have them nonetheless. They have enough destructive power to cause harm.
Right.
And Iran, that does not have nuclear weapons, not even close.
That we know about, right?
That we know about, but it's.
I'm not trying to fearmonger here. I'm just trying to be fair. We don't know.
Iran is saying that they're going to enrich their uranium up to 5%, as we record this right now. So I don't know. Probably news could change by Wednesday, where they're
right. 5% still isn't enough to make a nuclear bomb.
It's not even close.
No, not even
90% uranium. Iran had 20% enriched uranium in 2010.
Right.
But that was under the blessing of the U.S.
Right.
They were using that enriched uranium for medical isotopes that were built when the Shah was in power.
That's correct.
So, they had 20% uranium before.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of this is, it's my opinion. And when I speculate, I let you know that I'm speculating, is that countries, Iran is enriching their uranium right now to negotiate it away. Like, I think that's why a lot of countries, they do things like develop nuclear weapons programs,
right,
or enrich their uranium, because they want to have a bargaining chip,
right? They want to
negotiate away, because these countries are typically under high sanction relief.
Right.
Now, we've covered North Korea a lot. We pointed out that North Korea does have nuclear weapons, but they have the ability they have the firepower in their artillery systems pointed at Seoul, where they could still kill upwards of 250,000 people in Seoul, regardless if they had nuclear weapons or not.
Right.
So you know, I'm open up. My speculation is that they have nuclear weapons to negotiate them away because they're under crippling sanctions and they're starving.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with Iran. Iran right now, they want to. Obviously they want to use that nuclear energy because they want to export more oil.
Right. So that they
Nuclear
don't have.
energy. They have a lot of oil in Iran.
Mm-hmm.
Nuclear energy would give them the ability to become a first world country probably
Right.
in the
To
future.
not get high on their own supply, basically.
To not get high on their own supply.
Right.
But no one wants that in the world. No one wants them to be a real power. No one wants them to be an actual like an economically stable country.
Right, which is weird because, you know, when we have more economically stable countries in the world, it typically like benefits the world. Not
They
to the
become
vice.
less rogue. I mean, I was about to say you become less of a rogue state when you're economically strong, but
Right,
look in the
because you're
case
like,
of
hey, I'm
Saudi
making money. Why do I need to fuck around? You know?
Arabia. But look in the case of Saudi Arabia. I
Well,
mean,
yeah,
I guess what Saudi Arabia really is an example of, Saudi Arabia, they don't have a military, really. They don't really have a military.
just buy a bunch of guns.
They have a bunch of weapons, but they don't have a military that could really fight anyone in the Middle East besides very, very poor countries like Yemen.
Right.
They can't like go toe to toe with. I don't think Saudi Arabia can go to toe to toe with any country really in the Middle East. Iran would destroy them in a matter of days. Iraq walked in. Iraq would have when Saddam Hussein was in power. Iraq would have walked through Saudi Arabia in probably a couple of maybe a week at most if there was no U.S. base there.
Right.
They just use their money, their oil revenue to kind of rent the U.S. Army.
Yeah. Yeah.
They rent
Hired
they
guns.
rent armies and mercenaries. It's funny because they rent the U.S. Army or they rent like child soldiers in the Sudan or they rent Al Qaeda. That's their strategy. It's not necessarily because they are like the monarch or just they're crazy ideological nut jobs, because a lot of them just like being the Al-Assad family and having power. They just use that as an army, those fanatics, as a way to project their influence. But okay, that is what we weren't supposed to go into today. Where were we?
We were talking about like the weaponization. So do you feel satisfied in kind of that explanation about like what the difference is between the energy, the nuclear for energy and the nuclear for weapons, or were there other outstanding questions that maybe I hadn't
So
answered?
here's the big outstanding question. So let's just say if a country is at 5% enriched uranium,
Mm-hmm.
how long does it take to get from 5% to 90%?
Honestly, I don't know, but I can say that it would take a while, right?
Does it take 6 months?
I know what you're trying to do here, Henry, and I know that we've always been 6 months away from Iran getting the bomb, and I know that that's like the talking point anytime we want to ratchet up our propaganda against them. My frank answer is I just don't know. Like, this is my ineptitude for like the subject matter. I'm certain that they could do it in 6 months if they really wanted to try, right? Like, why not? If North Korea can do it, like, why can't they? You know, they're in a much better position to be able to do it, with the exception of course, the sanctions and stuff, and the U.S. breathing down their throat. But I think a better question is like, why would they? You know, like why would they? Again, we're talking about like they want to enrich their uranium, not necessarily to make bombs, but because they want a bargaining chip, right? They would much rather just be like, hey, okay, I'll give this up so that you can take off the sanctions, right? That's kind of more their MO, at least from what we read into it. I don't
Yeah,
know. I don't know.
that's my take. That's really my take as well, is that they're just enriching to just get some type of leverage and sanction relief. But I
Right.
mean, I don't.
Maybe they do want the bomb. I don't know. You know, they've said some pretty crazy shit in the past, you know, like death to Israel, death to America, death to everybody, you know, so like you got to take that shit seriously sometimes, right? So, like that's a thing. Do we want people who say that kind of stuff to have the ability to make it in the first place? Probably not. I can totally understand, you know, where people would have some concern there. But, you know, the point though is that the technology is the same. it is possible. Whether that happens in 6 months, 6 weeks, or 6 years is unclear to me personally. But it's all kind of a moot point, because the real point is that it can be done. That is a possibility. And this is where we come at an impasse. Do we let people like Iran or any other state that just wants to come up on their energy game, give them the tools to make bombs if they want, knowing that other countries have made bombs with those tools in the past, knowing that the technology is exactly the same, but at the same time also knowing that this can liberate them from their energy needs, and that can lift them out of poverty in many cases, or can bring them to the table, economically on the global world stage. There's a giant, pros and cons here. But I guess, that's kind of too hard of a topic for me to go over. Mostly when we talk about, nuclear as an energy source, I can say definitively that it's totally viable, and we should definitely pursue, different types of nuclear energy here in the U.S. Should that be the case applied across the globe, a little bit of cognitive dissonance happens. So I don't know.
So what's the path forward for nuclear energy?
Cool. So again, I'll segment that by saying, what I might say for the US could be wildly different from what I say for the world. Mostly because, we don't vote for like the Shah of Iran, and we don't, have a say in North Korea's, domestic policy, or, or global policy rather. So I can't really say, I can't project what we should do on a world stage for nuclear energy, but I can project that onto the United States, because, we're from the US, we already have nuclear energy. We already have bombs. So like, it's kind of off the table at this point for us to be like, oh, we're going to make bombs. We already have mad bombs. Then we're past that point, I think we totally should use nuclear, or at least it should be a part of the conversation when we're thinking about, breaking away from our dependence on fossil fuels. There's no question, in my opinion. The questions are, how do we do it? And how do we make it better than what it is already? I pointed out, France, a westernized, modern, energy-hungry, country in Europe, is producing so much energy, largely due to nuclear, that they're able to export it at a premium and make $3 billion a year, euros a year, which is more than $3 billion. I have no idea what the exchange rate is today, but it's more. So I hate all the arguments to say, oh, they're a small country, it can't work. They're just as energy hungry. We can do it. Saying that they're smaller and that we're bigger and we can't do it because we're bigger is like, in my opinion, very un-American. In the words of Barack Obama, yes, we can. Or for our Republican folks, maybe I can borrow the term "make America great again." That is when we actually cared about nuclear, and expanding that there. Sorry, libertarians, I can't think of like any useful slogans to fit this situation.
Taxation is theft.
Yeah, that'll work really well with the nuclear. Yeah.
Taxation is theft. I can't tell you how many people Facebook friend me with that. Like, they'll be like, Michael Stewart. I'm just making up a name right now.
Yeah.
Taxation is theft underneath their Facebook profile picture.
Yeah.
But all right, go on.
Yeah. So like, I think it's like, that's a cheap answer. Oh, they're smaller. We can't do that because we're way bigger. It's like, no, yes, we can. We totally can. This is a non-issue. Understanding a lot of the risks that I outlined before, I think we can mitigate a lot of these risks by exploring greater technologies. Right now, the whole world is only producing like 6% of the energy output in nuclear, right? So if we were investing more in nuclear, clearly, the market dictates that we would make innovations in such sectors to make it safer, to make it more efficient, to make it better. And there are options on the table that mitigate a lot of these, concerns. And the one that I really, really want to talk about and spend some time kind of fleshing out is thorium.
I'm glad you brought that up because I don't really know that much about thorium. And I saw some comments in the YouTube page talking about thorium. So I think it's good that we talk about it. I'm pretty ignorant, so just lead the way. Like, what should I know about it? What is it?
Okay, so thorium is like uranium and plutonium in the sense that it is a radioactive element. It is less radioactive by quite a bit. Depending on where you are, it could be more abundant or less abundant. But generally speaking, it's understood to be very much more abundant overall in terms of like where you can find it. It's pretty decentralized, and you need a whole lot less of it to make energy. The way that thorium reactors work is slightly different from the way that that like our current nuclear uranium plutonium reactors would work. The bit about like steam energy and shit like that part is the same. I'm not going to go too deeply into the science behind, how a liquid salt, reactor or lifter reactor works compared to, our current nuclear reactors, because frankly, I don't think I can articulate it well enough. But what you need to know, couple of like top line bullet points is that, with uranium, we don't use all of the fuel. We burn it really, really hot, and then we stick it all in the ground, and it stays radioactive for tens of thousands of years. So a bullet point you might take away from thorium, pretty big one, is that, the radioactivity of the waste would be about 70 to 100 years. So we're talking orders of magnitude less times dangerous in terms of like how long it stays dangerous for. Are some arguments like to be made about that it's more radioactive during that 70 years, but like we can deal with 70 to 100 years. 10,000 years sounds like something like far and beyond what we can even fathom in terms of doing that. Also, we use a hell of a lot more thorium. We use more of it when we're actually burning it, when we're using it to create energy. Right now, like I said, we use the uranium, about 2 to 3% of the stuff that we make. You can use thorium upwards of 80%. So we can use a hell of a lot more of it, right? So it's kind of like, I'll skip that. But the point though is that the fuel is readily available. A lot of people say that you can just dig it up out of the ground and then use it. That's not entirely true. It's not completely ready to be used. You have to do some shit to it. But the point though is that you have to do not as much things to it to make it like potent enough to use. And that's because it's burned differently. And again, I don't really want to get into the weeds on how it's burned. So you'll just have to take my word on it. The way that we extract it is much different and much more effective. I guess like some high level overview is that it's what's called a breeder system, which means that you bombard it with some neutrons. That's like the catalyst, right? What gets it going. And then the thorium becomes plutonium, which then is used. And that can get a little bit scary, I think, because, you hear, oh shit, it's not thorium anymore, it's plutonium. Can that be used to make a bomb? Yeah, it could, in theory, but it's also a giant pain in the ass, right? Just because it's much more, the amount that you have to make would be ridiculous amounts, and the half-life of them, so how long it stays in that state, is much, much, much shorter. So, it's a fucking pain in the ass. Like, could you make a bomb with thorium? Thorium itself, no. The stuff that it turns into, uranium, you could make into a bomb. It's totally possible, but it's even more of a pain in the ass to make a bomb with that than it is to make a bomb with your regular uranium reactors and the technology that's used for that, right? Where was I? Lost my train of thought. Do you have another question? Maybe that'll get me back on track.
So can nuclear weapons be made from thorium?
Right. So we're just kind of talking about that.
We were talking about that.
Mm-hmm. And the answer is yes, potentially. But again, it is such a pain in the ass to do this that it's not even worth it, right? So basically how it works is that, I guess I do have to talk about how thorium reactors work in order to make this make sense. So a thorium reactor basically works by breeding thorium
An
into,
elephant and a pig.
right. Yeah, it's like you transform it, like from the thorium, which isn't fissile. You can't use that for a bomb, into something that makes it a bomb, right? That process is how the energy is created. Um, but once that U-233, that's what it would turn into, uranium-233. Once that is made, we feed that right back into the reactor, right? So we make like a little bit of a loop, right? We need some fissile material, uranium, to get it started. And then that does some shit to the thorium to turn it into uranium. And then we take that uranium and we put it right back in the beginning. Could you potentially like maybe skim some uranium off the top and like save it somewhere to make a bomb? For sure. Absolutely. Like they've made uranium-233 bombs before. It works just fine, right? But the amount that you can skim off the top before it like breaks the cycle and makes the thorium reactor stop working is like, it's so small that it would take a really long time. And yeah, it would just be impractical at that point. Not to mention it's incredibly radioactive. So that would be difficult. I always love like kind of like the arguments against nuclear, because people think somehow that someone's going to sneak into a nuclear facility and like steal all the uranium and shit. It's like, dude, that's not even practical. Like, it's not like you would need a whole fucking military to do that shit. And even then,
You would die just by getting close to the reactor, though.
yeah, dude, it's
You
like,
would
all
die
right,
instantly.
these buildings like are regular, not even a thorium reactor, but like a regular like nuclear reactor is a giant facility, right? And the reactor itself is built with 4-foot thick concrete and rebar walls. Like they're literally rated to take an airplane. Like the regulations for making these things in the US at least is you should be able to fly an airplane into it and nothing happens. Like that's the safety capacity. So, okay, cool. We got to get through that much concrete. Let's say we do. Let's say we get in, right? Well, there's definitely going to be guards, right? There's definitely going to be other security there. So good luck getting past them. Let's say you're awesome and you kill them all and you get through the thick concrete. All right, well, cool. So now we're at the reactor, but the reactor is shielded by like lead and steel and a bunch of other shit that's super thick. Why? Because they need to like contain the radiation so that we can work with it, right? So it's like, get through that now. All right, cool. We've gotten through that. Now we're in an exposed reactor where all the radiation is. You're literally going to die immediately. Like, like you're just going to die. So like, I don't love kind of the silly arguments against like steel.
No, it's a stupid argument. It's just used to promulgate fear in people's minds about nuclear energy. It just doesn't make sense. It's just, I'm trying to think of a good comparison of being like the common thing that you hear is like, what if a terrorist sneaks into the nuclear reactor and detonates a stick of dynamite?
It's not, it just, it doesn't do anything. Like it literally doesn't.
Well,
like I've said before, you can literally take this stuff and burn it. You can take uranium. You can take the most radioactive uranium and burn it with fire. It's not going to be a nuclear bomb.
it's specific.
That's not how it works. Yeah, even if it was the most highly refined specific uranium and you took it and you burned it with fire, right? It's not going to do shit. As a matter of fact, maybe we should talk about a little bit of how a nuclear bomb works, right?
That's your uranium-235, right?
Right. Well, there are other different nuclear bombs. I mentioned before that nuclear bombs have been made by 233, 238, a bunch of other elements. There's also plutonium bombs. The point, though, is you have a radioactive material that's unstable. The difference between the bomb and the reactor is that in the reactor, we take that energy that's created by splitting nuclear atoms and capturing the energy that's released slowly and over time. Think like incense burner, right? Real slow, wafts all around, smells real nice, right? But a nuclear bomb it's literally a bomb. All of the energy, all of the explosive power happens immediately. And the science behind getting it to work is crazy because you need to have a bunch of what's called a critical mass, a bunch of nuclear material super, super close together, enough where it could create a chain reaction fast enough and efficiently enough to blow. And even then you need a bomb around the nuclear bomb. And that's what causes an incredible amount of pressure to hold it all together so that that nuclear reaction can happen. And all of this needs to happen in a split second, like less than a second. All of this explosion happens. And that's how you make a nuclear bomb. It's incredibly difficult. Like, I don't knock North Korea, for having shitty bombs in a certain respect, because honestly, what they've got, even though it's pretty shitty, that must have taken a lot of fucking work to do. Like, it's very, very, very difficult. The real concern with nuclear energy and nuclear bombs is when a state actor who's acquired the technology to enrich, uranium or plutonium to the point to make a bomb, makes a bomb, right? Nobody's stealing this stuff and making a bomb. Like, it's not, no, you can't, like, it's completely impractical, unfeasible. You can't.
Doesn't for like a thermonuclear weapon, don't you need a hydrogen, or for a hydrogen bomb, don't you need an A bomb to trigger it in the first place?
Yeah, you need another bomb around the bomb.
You need a bomb, you need an atomic bomb to trigger the actual hydrogen bomb, right?
You need a bomb on top of the bomb.
Am I speaking out of my ass right now?
I mean,
or am I got it a little bit?
I don't know the specifics on what type of bomb you need, but I do know that you do need a bomb around the bomb in order to make the bomb work. It's like bombception. It's nuts. It's very, very difficult to achieve.
A bomb within a bomb.
Right.
Yeah, like to think that there's highly trained super terrorist that would be able to do that is just kind of like, it's funny.
That's silly.
Even with even with the terrorists that are state sponsored, which are most of them, or a lot of them at least, they're not getting that much money. They're not getting enough money. They're not getting enough money to build nuclear facilities, trigger 2 bombs at once to blow up a city. But that's the fear. That's the fear. It's politicians. Tulsi Gabbard is her big thing is that she's running off the threat of nuclear war. I mean, do you think that is a threat?
Remains to be seen. I'm not really sold on the idea.
The thing with Tulsi Gabbard, I don't think that she should run on that because she's running on the threat of nuclear war. Obviously, it's horrible,
right?
But doesn't really resonate with people that much,
right? I don't really love fear mongering in general. It's just,
she should. I think that this is getting off topic again, but I think she should run more so on wasteful spending and escapades rather than the threat of nuclear war.
Agreed.
But that's for another show. But let's see, we're
talking about thorium, right? And we kind of got off topic because I wanted to talk about why you can't steal this shit to make bombs. So we already talked about how thorium is pretty widely available. We talked about how efficient it is in the sense that we can use it to a higher degree than we use our current thorium reactors, our current nuclear reactors. We talked about, that it's less dangerous for like less time, right? So 70 years, 100 years, as opposed to 10,000 years for our current fuel. So that kind of clears up a lot of those issues there. So like, what's wrong with it, right? There's things that are wrong with it, much like anything. I'd argue that a lot of the things I'm about to say can be mitigated just by putting more money into it. But the first thing that's wrong with it is literally the money. Right now, it's not cost efficient to create a thorium reactor, and not because it's like technically harder. I mean, I guess it is in many respects, but it's because nobody's investing in it. And this is not new technology per se. Like, it's been around for decades already, and we've proven that it can work and that it can be made smaller and that it can be made safer. But at the end of the day, the scientists and the lobbyists and the rich people that were footing the bill for creating nuclear power decided to go with our current technology, even though it's not the most efficient and even though it creates a lot more problems in the end. But if we look at France as a model, wow, I can't believe I said that in a sentence. If we look at France in a model, they have a top down.
French models are usually naked, right?
Yes.
The only context I'm adding is this totally stupid, like, slapstick. Sure,
I mean, it works.
Humor.
It breaks up a lot of my nerding quite well. So if we look at France as a model, they have a like top-down style government, which means that, Macron goes, "Hey, what should we do about energy?" And he calls up his lackeys, the rich folks, and they're like, "Hey, how about nuclear?" And he's like, "Okay, cool, let's do it." And that's the end of the story, right? Whereas here in the United States, like we beat a dead horse for fucking ever until we run out of time, and then we do something, and it's usually not as good as if we just went for something earlier, right? But that's how our government works, and I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying that's the reality. So if we had been more aggressive at investing in nuclear, generally speaking, but definitely investing in newer technologies like liquid salt reactors, of which would be powered by thorium and a few other elements, then it's very possible that we could get the cost down. As a matter of fact, the size of a regular nuclear reactor that we're currently using, light water reactors, they're massive. There's these giant buildings, right? They have to be on the water. With thorium reactors, it's possible to make them much smaller. It's even possible to make them on an assembly line, right? So like the components to make this, we can literally put in, Ford style and mass produce them if we want. And they can be modular and we can plop them basically anywhere. We do need a source of water, but like not a giant, like not a fucking lake, and they're relatively safe in that respect. And with economies of scale, if we were willing to invest in it, yeah, the upfront cost would be high, but ultimately the payout would be much better. Energy production, much safer energy production, much less wasteful, and much less damaging potentially to the environment. It covers up a lot of things. There's this interesting thing about some myths about thorium here that you might hear on the interweb about meltdown. So we think about Chernobyl, we think about Fukushima and a few of the other disasters, and we say, okay, if they melt down, like everyone's going to die, right? Well, there's this clever way.
You'll have to kill the dogs at least.
Yeah, that was a sad part of that show. So
people get more outraged with the death of animals than the death of humans in shows.
It's because they don't have a choice and they didn't do anything wrong. That's
people enjoy watching people get killed in shows. If you kill an animal, you're
God forbid.
Right? I mean, I literally turn off the TV when a dog is killed in a movie.
Yeah, Old Yeller really got me when I was
like, fuck this director.
Yeah,
but go on.
So there's a clever way that they've set up liquid salt reactors that use thorium as their fuel, and that's that there is a little plug. We'll call it like the butt plug of the reactor, right?
The butt plug?
Yeah. And
are you sure that's the imagery that you want to use? The butt plug of the reactor?
The butt plug of the reactor.
Now I'm just thinking of a hairy ass with a butt plug in it.
Perfect. Okay, so let's say...
Why are you thinking of a hairy ass, Henry?
Why can't it be waxed?
I don't know. Just in my head. I can't get the hairy ass out of my head. All right.
So basically this plug, has a specific melting point, right? I don't know what the melting point is. Let's call it 100. I don't know, 100 anything you want, right? If the, if you were to walk away from this reactor and catastrophic failure happens and this stuff starts melting down, what's going to happen is that this plug that's holding everything together, holding all the nuclear material in place, is going to melt. When that plug melts, all of the nuclear fuel, the liquid salt, the liquid, thorium salt components are going to leak out of the reactor and into specifically defined, I forget what they call them actually, but they're containers, right? That you can think of them as the toilets for the liquid salt. And so you pull out the butt plug and out rushing comes all of your liquid salt. And that effectively stops it dead in its tracks, right? No more reaction, which means no more melting down, which means no more danger, which means, obviously the energy stops, but like everyone can agree, I'd rather the lights go off than, everyone to die, right? And it's clever and it's pretty awesome. Now, I will say that there are some myths online about you can turn it on and walk away and set it and forget it. It's the Showtime barbecue, the Showtime rotisserie of nuclear power. It's not. People still need to tend to it, and you still need to pay attention and make sure that everyone's going to be safe and that it works. But as far as like redundant safety features go, like there's no such thing of like pulling the plug on a nuclear reactor. Like you need to make sure that shit stays cool. You need to make sure that shit does not leak. You need to make sure that shit does not melt down. If Chernobyl is any indication of it, like there is a lot of shit that can go wrong. And if any number of those things go wrong, then you're fucked. So it's a pretty neat system. And I was watching a TED talk about this, and I didn't go back and corroborate this. So these are all alternative facts as far as I'm concerned. But the one guy that was super interested in it, that did a lot of research for this TED talk, was claiming that a sphere of thorium that's like, I don't know, like this big, I don't know, a couple pounds or whatever, could be used to power your energy consumption for the rest of your life. And the cost of making that sphere on an industrial scale would be about $100. So, if we want to talk about lofty goals, that sounds pretty fucking awesome. I've got $100. I would totally buy this awesome magical sphere that gives you energy.
He was saying for forever. A single person?
Yeah, for a single person, $100 a person for the rest of your life. I've got enough $100 to power all like my entire like immediate family. That's a drop in the fucking bucket. Now, will we get to a point like in a utopian society where all you got to pay is $100 to power your energy consumption for the rest of your life? No, because that's not how capitalism works, right? They'll figure out ways to artificially inflate it, just like we figure out ways to artificially inflate oil, or how we figure out ways to artificially inflate the price of diamonds, right? Like there's still got to be a market for it. There's still got to be a supply and demand. I'm not an economist, but they'll figure some way to make it more than $100 for sure, because they got to make their money back. And I'm cool with that. But the point though is that the potential is there. And, thorium is just one of the alternative, like breeder type reactors that we could be looking into. And, it's funny that we're not doing anything about it. I think there are plenty of countries that are working on this. And I want to make a quick correction. So initially on a previous episode, when we talked about this, I said that, we have working currently thorium reactors. We don't. We shut them all down. We're not using them right now. India happens to be the market leader, and it has the largest thorium reactor in the world right now, and it's called, I'm going to butcher this, sorry Indians, Kakrapar 1 is the reactor that they're currently using, and they're building more. And then China's building a bunch of them. I think it's something like 18 of them that they want to build in the next like 30, 40 years. While, we're just maybe thinking about it, right? And it seems like that sucks. Why can't we be, in the forefront of this stuff? Why can't we be better at everyone than at this technology? I mean, we invented it. Like, why are we letting everyone else eat our lunch about it? It seems a little silly. I get it. We need money. We need lobbyists. We need shit like that. But the benefits seem to outweigh the cons in a lot of different ways. And to an early point that you made in the show, this seems to be like a totally fair middle ground for folks that want to reduce, our carbon emissions and reduce our reliance on foreign oil. It's a common ground between the liberals and the conservatives. That is, once we get past all the bullshit that we've already gotten past in the show already, and that's kind of, I don't know. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, in my opinion. And I encourage anyone who's even at all interested in it to look up thorium. There's hundreds of YouTube videos that'll probably do a much better job at talking about it and give you much more detail on how they work. And why they're potentially better than our current nuclear technologies, and certainly why they'd be better than using fossil fuels. And I think that we should use this in conjunction with our, other renewable energy sources, like you said, Henry. If you live in an area that you can make into a hydroelectric dam, go for it. But maybe also use thorium. And if you live in a place that's got a whole lot of sun, maybe throw up some solar panels, but also maybe think about using some clean nuclear in the mix as well. I don't know. What do you think?
No, I agree. I think that I'm all about industrial progress and getting as many people out of poverty in the world as possible.
Mhm.
Whatever that takes, I think that those people should have the right to do it. Like I don't think, whether that energy source be nuclear energy, whether that be fossil fuels, whether that be hydroelectricity, whether that be even renewable sources such as wind and solar energy, what people need to progress industrially so they can do things like power more hospitals and just power a better standard of living. I think people should be doing that because, at the end of the day, you want to think about how many, like, I feel like morality comes from, or, a big part of being a moral person is trying to keep as many human lives, or giving the chance to as many humans, like just beings, um, giving human beings a chance of life. And whatever energy does do that for that specific region, I think people should pursue it. That's kind of just like my take on the overall energy message. So whether it be whatever energy, whatever progresses you and your society, whether you're in the Congo, whether you're in Iceland, I mean, I think that's the route that you should ultimately go.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you up to the fossil fuel portion of it for reasons that I have described before. I think it's dangerous. And if we are to take the scientists at their word that we have not a whole lot of time to reduce our carbon emissions before we absolutely wreck the planet, I'm not in favor of pursuing.
What we should do, is, because I mean, everyone who listens to the show obviously knows that Danny is the smarter one on the show. So I think what we should plan on doing, I don't know if you're up for this or not, because obviously this is not like your full-time job or anything like that where you're studying energy resources, but we could get somebody like Alex Epstein on the show. You know, Alex Epstein?
I don't.
He's a fossil fuel evangelist. I guess that would be the best way to describe him.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a think tank called the Center of Industrial Progress. And I read his book called The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, and I read it. It came out, I think, 2014. And I really took a lot from that book, and it really made me think critically about just energy politics and energy in general. So I'll challenge you to read that book, or maybe even he self-narrates it on Audible. And maybe we can reach out to him and actually get him on the show, and you can ask him, you can bring up your concerns. I know I'm speaking on my ass. Obviously he doesn't know who we are, so he can't be on.
You never know, there are thousands of people listen, so
all right, maybe he does. I'll reach out to him. I'll say, hey, we want to have you.
But hey, I'm down. However, we need to get some folks that are on the opposite side of the spectrum for this, because I'm open to reading his book and I'm open to asking him a couple questions, but he will an expert like that will absolutely wreck me.
But not as a debate. Not like I don't want to set up a debate format. I just want. It's not about. I hate the whole like who won the debate. Like I don't think you should go into a debate with that objective of who wins and who loses, because someone could just be a far better debater, but could be debating a shittier point. You know what I mean? Like
a master debater, if you will.
A master debater. Someone can be far more knowledgeable on a subject matter and make you look like you don't know that much, or an ignorant, or a fool.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that person is taking a position that's not true. Maybe that person knows that the position is not true, but they just have so much knowledge they're able to spin the facts and all that. So I hate the whole thing of like who wins the debate and who doesn't win the debate. I think it should be more just a conversation and a search for truth, rather than, okay, what are you getting out of this? I want to hear the objectives. I want to hear what you have to say about this particular subject. Like,
I'm open to that.
That's what it is. Like when you're talking to somebody from a different political ideology from you, I don't think that you should go into the conversation of like who won the debate. Because in reality, if you look on YouTube and you look, everything is like Ben Shapiro destroyed socialist college student, or it will be Sam Cedar destroys libertarian on economic. Like, everyone is going to, the people who are in their audience who already agree with them politically are going to have confirmation bias and say, you know, their guy won. So I think the search for truth is the most important thing when it comes to a debate. So I wouldn't be concerned about talking to somebody who's more knowledgeable on the subject, because maybe you'll get something from it.
Sure. That's entirely possible. There's truths to a lot of different perspectives that are worth digging into. But I still want to get some like good renewable energy expert, or, you know, even maybe some clients.
Well, the guy, the former president of Greenpeace, he is like a anti-Greenpeace activist now. I don't want to, let me just look this up real quick. I don't want to totally speak out of my ass. Greenpeace anti.
What's kind of like the, while you look this up, what's kind of the overarching point to this dude? Like, what do you want to get out of this while you look?
Oh, nothing. I just think it's interesting. I'm not trying to get anything but present different perspectives and knowledge. That's it. Like, I'm not trying to promote a political ideology or a business or anything like that. I'm just saying I think it's interesting to hear opinions that are kind of taboo, or you don't really hear that much. I think it's healthy. Patrick Moore. Yeah. Patrick Moore is the guy I was talking about. He was a former activist and president of Greenpeace Canada, and he left Greenpeace in 1986, and he has been criticizing the environmental movement since he left Greenpeace, because he said that basically the environmental movement has been hijacked by a bunch of people who are just using it for political reasons. And I think that side does have a really good point, where a lot of people use environmentalism as a political tool for political fear mongering, because it's always kind of like, when you present the environmentalist argument, I'm not saying everyone, I'm just saying that there are people who are like, we're going to all be flooded and dead in 12 years if we don't get off 12. It's like always divisible by 6. It's always either 6 or 12 or
6 months
18.
to the bomb, 12 years to the everyone.
It's always 6, 12, 18. It's like, why is everyone, whenever you're trying to say that there's impending doom, it's always like,
it's the devil's
number.
number.
Always divide that number by 6. I guess it's half a year, so it's like conceivable. Listen, I'm not like smart. Like, I hope everyone knows that by now.
I'm not smart.
I'm not someone who's super smart who knows about every issue in the world. I just present things in an entertaining way, I guess, for the people who listen. But I think it's interesting, the arguments that the very pro or the anti-environmentalist movement makes. I just think they make interesting arguments.
For sure.
And a lot of the things that they say are things like climate change. The term climate change denier is kind of used as a label to beat down political opponents. Like, oh, he's a climate change denier just because he'll question something. So those points I think are valid. I think there should be more conversation about it. And
sure, yeah, I mean, it's unscientific to just choose, you know, whatever dogma you want to go by, whether that's, you know, climate science or climate change as a whole, or whether that be, you know, fuck it, fossil fuels are fine. You know, like, it's unscientific just picking like a stance and not look into the other side, or not test your theory, you know, for its merits.
Because, dude, I'll get to like even me, like, if I talk to an environmental scientist who was super, you know, who was an environmentalist, I would look like an idiot. You know, I would look like a dumb, ignorant fool. I mean, I already do that to myself half the time on the show. but I would look even more like one. Yeah, but maybe we should start doing more debates. I just like burped in my mouth.
And if you're listening, if you're watching this on YouTube, like feel free to, go into the comments section and tell us who you think the best people that we should reach out to, who are either experts in client science or renewable energy or even fossil fuels or climate science, like whatever, like let us know who we should be looking into. But please don't give us any Alex Jones types that don't actually bring their
chemtrails.
Yeah, we don't care about that shit. Like real science, real authors, real.
Some people care about chemtrails. Hey, man, I saw something on RTTV a couple of months ago, and it was like chemtrails. it was what happened with Alex Jones. And we'll wrap this up. I just want to make this this point, and you can add anything else. What happened with Alex Jones and that type of entertainment is that they'll see a study. There'll be a Harvard scientist will do a study that if they were to produce smoke or trails in the sky, enough of that, it will dim the sun, thus decreasing the temperature of the world, preventing global warming. And then Alex Jones will be like, they're trying to black out the sun. Oh, they're trying to make it forever night for the vampire pedophiles to come out forever. And it will just be like a theoretical experiment, and Alex Jones will run with it. Like, the pedophiles are coming out, the vampire pedophiles. I can't wait. I don't even know where to find Alex Jones stuff since he's been deplatformed.
Since he's been deported from the internet.
Which I think is wrong, because say what you want about him. I don't think people should never be censored. Let them just be crazy. Like,
we'll go down the rabbit hole on that issue, dude. We've had whole episodes on this shit. Let's maybe leave that. Leave the.
Yeah, let's wrap this episode up because we're at like an hour and a half right now, and I was initially planning on this episode to be like 40 minutes. I'm
can't do nuclear in 30 minutes,
I'm talked out today. All right. Let's wrap this up. Thanks, guys, for joining us. Look forward for more content, and we will see you later this week. Peace.